From the News Channel 5 Network, this is MorningLine.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Burriss here on a Wednesday. And as always, a good show on tap this morning. I'm going to invite you to join in the conversation. As always, you're welcome to call. We'll get the number up there in a moment. But what we're going to talk about is the situation out of Garland, Texas. The shooting there in connection with an art show, an art exhibit that was going on. As you know by now, ISIS is claiming responsibility for these two gunmen that showed up at the location there and were gunned down and killed. And a lot of issues have spawned out of this. Everything from the media coverage to, what do you think of this art exhibit where they had editorial cartoons depicting Muhammad, which certainly is something that was going to draw some attention, perhaps from extremists, as it may have. And then also the after effects on the responsibility, how it applies to the Muslim community as a whole, and what Americans take from this. We're going to get into all of that this morning, take your phone calls, and also get you up to speed on the very latest with our guests to talk about it. And let's introduce them to you now. We have Paul Galloway with us this morning. He's the Executive Director of the American Muslim Advisory Council.
Good morning.
Nice to have you on, sir. Appreciate you coming on. And Professor Larry Burriss from over at MTSU, Journalism Professor from there. And it's good to have you on, sir.
Good to be here.
Appreciate it. We have two individuals, that I think bring different elements to the table and some of what we're going to be covering as a whole this morning. Before I get comment from the both of you, I thought we would maybe just run the very latest piece we have this morning, just to give folks a little bit of a background on how things have played out in Texas, to kind of set the table for us. Then we'll start our discussion and get into the phone calls. So let's have a look at this story right now.
It's still unclear whether Elton Simpson and Nadir Sofi were ordered by ISIS to open fire at a Prophet Muhammad cartoon contest in Texas. On Tuesday, the terror group claimed responsibility for the attack, but terror experts remain skeptical.
I really think it's a sign of weakness on ISIS's part, a reflection that they see that their momentum has slowed a bit.
Investigators are now examining the gunman's contacts and online activities. In a Twitter posting just before the attack, federal authorities say Simpson pledged allegiance to ISIS. But even before that, CBS affiliate WCCO reports Simpson began communicating with a man known as Mujahid Miski, an American reportedly fighting with the terror group Al-Shabaab in Somalia. In one exchange, Miski tweeted, "The brothers from the Hebdo attack did their part. It's time for brothers in the U.S. to do their part." Simpson tweeted back, "When will they ever learn?" The exchange references the gunman who killed 12 people at the newspaper Charlie Hebdo in January. The paper's editor is rejecting comparisons between the Paris and Texas attacks.
These people are organizing contest, anti-Islamist contest. It's an obsession. We don't have this obsession.
On Tuesday, the magazine was honored with a Freedom of Expression Courage Award in New York. Several writers boycotted the event. Edward Lawrence for CBS News, Washington.
All right, that's just kind of a brief overview. It doesn't touch on it all, but let me get to our guests. And as I said, the phone lines are open. Let me just talk with you first, Paul. It's been a few days now since this has happened. The fallout after the effect, what is it that you focus on at this point, or what is a particular concern to you?
Well, I think the very first thing that we have to say is we should really appreciate Garland PD and the police officer, who is just an absolute hero. I mean, coming under, two semi-automatic or even automatic rifles, and he's armed with a handgun and is an off-duty traffic cop, and he saved so many lives. Mm-hmm. So before anything, I think we really have to just, especially with all the current events that are happening, mm-hmm. is take note and appreciate good police work.
Yeah.
After that, I think one of the most important things is to say that violence is never an appropriate response to speech. And the community has to be extremely clear that we're not going to tolerate or ever harbor or encourage any type of response like that. The answer to speech is more speech. Dialogue is where we should be taking these things. We live in America, and free speech is a core value for all faith communities. Without the First Amendment, we couldn't worship, right? And so I think that it's been incredibly clear. If you look at all the Muslim organizations, they've made statements condemning this. They made statements condemning Charlie Hebdo. And where the organized Muslim community from from our scholars, our religious leaders, down to our activists, we've had a united voice that says this is not what we represent, this is not what our religion teaches, and these people are unfortunately, sadly misguided souls.
You do get the sense maybe that Pam Geller, with the group that organized this exhibit, is an art exhibit depicting political cartoons displaying the Prophet Muhammad, which can be offensive to some in the Muslim community, that some of what I've heard her say after the fact is, all right, this just shows the type of threat that exists in this country. This was a free speech act. We had this art exhibit, and it drew this kind of response. This isn't Paris, this isn't Europe, this isn't somewhere in the Middle East. This is happening here. And so our free speech could be under attack by Muslims. That's kind of how I take some critics seeing this and raising a warning flag. Is that fair?
Well, I think in light of understanding that kind of claim, I'd like to say we need better champions for free speech. And what I mean by that, this is not the first time that Pam Geller has been around an actual shooting. If you remember back in 2011, just 4 years ago, Anders Breivik, the Norway bomber and shooter, killed 77 people. In his manifesto that explained his motives, he actually quoted Geller multiple times as one of his inspirations. So she's a person of controversy. She's been a longtime critic of the Muslim community, and she went to the very venue where there was an event that was celebrating the Prophet Muhammad and talking about the peaceful message of Islam, and she went to the same exact venue to hold this event. So in a lot of ways, I'll defend her right to do any type of speech she wants to do. But at the same time, for her to position herself as a champion of free speech, I think there's a lot more to it than just that.
Okay, and I know you're sitting next to a champion of free speech, Professor Burriss. And yeah, your kind of take on this. I mean,
Sure.
Clearly it seemed like organizing an event like this, based on what we saw that happened in France, I mean, it was going to be controversial. Your take on it and maybe how it played out.
Sure. There's a phrase I use sometimes. It was "D-U-M be stupid."
Yeah.
She has the right to do that. She has the right to do her free speech. Should she have done it is a whole nother issue. She's stirring up controversy. That's what it's all about. Free speech has always been under attack. The unpopular views have always tried to be suppressed. During World War I, a couple of newspaper editors were lynched because they weren't patriotic enough. Okay, so I think you have to be careful stopping free speech.
Yeah.
I'd be very concerned about the government saying, no, you can't do this. If somebody wants to do hateful speech, I'll tell them how to do it, and I'll tell the other side how to protest it. Mm-hmm. So you really need, as you were saying, you really need both sides in this. You really don't want to be suppressing speech. Where does it stop?
Yeah, and where do you draw? We know there are some limits on free speech.
Sure.
For instance, yelling fire, the classic example in a crowded movie theater that could put people's lives at risk. And I agree with you. I'm the last person that's going to advocate censorship. And I guess no one really imagined that someone would actually show up with weapons here in this country to do what they did in Texas. But what this conference was and what this exhibit was created a real danger for people. That's where I start looking at, yeah, where do you draw the line, Professor? I mean, if I have a belief, if you tell me that we're going to have this and people are going to show up with guns and there are going to be lives lost, I'm going to take a real hard look. I'm not sure how I come down. I'm a journalist. I'm going to take a real hard look at putting some limits on this, just as I would put on limits or charge someone with yelling fire in a theater that leads to a stampede that hurts people. I mean, that's...
Without getting into gun control,
Yeah.
what kind of security do you have at these sorts of places?
And they did hire more, didn't they?
They did hire more. So you need to keep the people with the guns out of a situation like that. You put a barrier around it. You say, unless you are registered at this event, you can't come within 50 yards, 100 yards.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to keep the other people away, and that would then allow the free speech. It would allow the protesters to protest outside, and both sides should be able to do it. You're absolutely right. You don't want guns at a place like this.
Yeah.
There's that issue involved there, and how do you control that? And by the way, the quote on shouting fire is shouting fire in a crowded theater and causing a panic.
Right.
So that part is often left out. So there are ways of controlling the situation so there's not a panic.
So there's not a panic.
Right.
That's a good point.
The state has a responsibility to protect everybody doing free speech.
Yeah.
Free speech doesn't mean shooting somebody. That's not free speech.
Gotcha.
I'd like to chime in on that because
Sure.
I think that we also have to remember, the Constitution doesn't guarantee you the right to not be offended, right? And so I think it's really important that people who are of good conscience and who basically want to see our community be safer, is for us to to kind of change the marketplace. I think that if it's not profitable, if it's not attractive to do these kind of events, I mean, anytime you want to talk about Islam and Muslims, if you can't replace it with Jew or Christian or Hindu or even a racial community and say the same thing, you probably shouldn't say it, even though you can. And I think that's the difference between, you know, what you can do and what you should do, which just comes down to wisdom.
Yeah. Now, I'm wondering, too, as you know, we've had our issues here with controversy out of Murfreesboro when they were constructing the new mosque there. And it's interesting, over the last several months, and I did a lot of stories on the new mosque going in there, it's settled down. You know, I mean, it went through the courts. The legal issues seem to be, you know, taken care of now, and they're good citizens in that community.
And the city of Murfreesboro was still there.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And you know exactly what I'm talking about, of course, being from MTSU. Still there, it's quiet. But I wonder now, and I have a concern about this, and being fairness, something like this happens.
Sure.
All of a sudden, some of those folks who were against this mosque there and the larger facility being built are worried now, wow, we saw that in Texas, and we have this big mosque. Not that that's come up yet.
Sure.
But, I mean, what would you say to folks that are like, gosh, we have a mosque here now, a big one. I remember, wasn't there a controversy there? Should we be worried?
Well, and here's the thing. That mosque actually had threats against it.
It did. Oh, and some of the equipment was firebombed when it was being built.
Exactly. So, and this is both First Amendment issues. I mean, you know, freedom of religion, your freedom of conscience to worship as you see fit, as well as freedom of expression. Those are all under the same First Amendment clause. So one of the things that I think is really the long-term answer, and I'm going to probably say this a million times today, is that we have to build relationships. We have to have honest, frank dialogue that crosses cultural and religious boundaries so that people get to know each other. Because it's without those relationships, it's the fear of the unknown that drives it.
All right, we need to take a break on that. Now, when we come back, we'll take phone calls. Your call, 737-7587, and more with our conversation, Professor Burriss from MTSU and Paul Galloway, Executive Director of the American Muslim Advisory Council. We'll be right back after this. Stay with us.